For the sake of time, we're not going to read the passage that we'll look at today, but we'll cite several verses as we look through it. We're going to be looking at Joshua chapter 3 and 4 today, and some things there. But and I titled the message today, Remembering to Remember Even When We Forget. Memory issues and remembering things is a constant source of frustration for all of us, isn't it? And especially as we get older. Every time I look in the mirror, I'm reminded that I'm not getting any younger. And for probably the biggest complaint for people 50 and older is that they're just having trouble remembering things. But regardless of our age, we all struggle with remembering things. And so mankind is constantly inventing new things to help us not forget. How many ever had a BlackBerry?
Oh, wow, I didn't know.
How about a Palm Pilot? How many of you even know what those things are? Right? Because, but, those are two tools. And then now we have, I was thinking about it as I was preparing the message. We have 5 different Alexas in our house. And Tammy also has one in her office. And it's funny, I used to kind of kid her or scoff at her how much she used Alexa. Because she's constantly saying, Alexa, remind me at what's such and such a time to do something or to call something or whatever. And you guys know me, I like to cook and bake. And so I constantly use our Alexas for a timer. I didn't realize how much I'd come to rely on her. But funny story. So, I'll be baking or whatever, and I'll say, Alexa, set a timer for 10 minutes, and whatever. And then when the 10 minutes is up, she'll give an annoying alarm until you tell her, Alexa, stop. Well, and our oven also is, so when you preheat it, it'll give off a tone similar to the Alexa alarm when it heats up. So one day I'm sitting there and preheating the oven to bake something, and the tone goes off to tell me that it's preheated, and I say, Alexa, stop. Now, the reason that it's funny is because Josh happened to be sitting there in the living room with me, and he looks over at me with a big grin on his face and says, Jim, I don't think that's going to help. Because it wasn't Alexa, it was the timer, but still, again, it's just one of those tools that, again, I use it a whole lot more than I realized I ever would. AI tools, some of you probably, if you have an Apple, use Siri or whatever, but they're all there to, again, help us not forget, because we just tend to do that. And the chapters, Joshua 3 and 4 today, actually talks about something that Jehovah did for his people to help them not forget. And that's kind of what we want to look at today. But as we look at it, and we'll just talk a little bit, instead of reading about what's going on here. And we know from, the beginning of the book that the Israelites are at a pivotal place in their history. They've been wandering around the desert for 40 plus years at this point. And they've slowly watched everybody that was 20 years old or older when they left Egypt slowly pass away, including their leaders. And, they just recently lost the man who had led them out of Egypt and led them through all these countless difficulties in the wilderness for 40 plus years. And Moses, he passed away. And Jehovah's handpicked successor to him, Joshua, had taken over, and he was tasked with leading the people into the promised land. So that's where we are as we get to these 2 chapters is, they're there. And so, if you think about what's going on with the Israelites at this point, again, they've just lost their leader. They're getting ready to go into the land, and there's got to be some apprehension there. A good bit of them were probably around when all those years ago, Moses had sent the spies into the land to look at it, and they'd come back with their report that, man, there's some giants in that land, and we're like grasshoppers compared to them. And they've got these great walled cities that, it's going with seemingly impenetrable walls. And so, there's that going on too. They're wondering, how in the world are we going to do this? I mean, they heard the stories and got to be wondering about that. But, again, there's had to be some apprehension on their part about the daunting task that lay ahead of them. And then there's Joshua himself. I mean, as we mentioned, Jehovah had handpicked him to be Moses' successor. But, Joshua had been there for the entire journey. And he certainly knew, as Jehovah called them, that these people were stiff-necked people. I mentioned earlier about my mom. She's a stiff-necked person. Stubborn and not always, wanting to listen or learn. And that is said of the Israelites themselves. And so Joshua knew that. And, again, he's taking over for Moses. And, yes, he had followed Moses for that 40-plus years, but still, we're being honest with ourselves, or he was being honest with himself, there's probably that's just human nature to be a little apprehensive as we face something new. So that's going on with him as well. Jehovah reassured him and tried to. There were numerous mentions in the first part of the book about Jehovah telling him to be strong and courageous. But still, he had to be going through some apprehension himself. And then there's issues that we find the Israelites here with today, and that's getting into the land itself. Do you remember where they were at this point? They're standing on the brink of the Jordan River, okay? And the Promised Land is literally on the other side. But as we've talked before, the Israelites, we're not just talking this room of people here. There were probably a couple of million people, plus all the animals and stuff, that had to get from one side to the other to actually enter the Promised Land. And as the passage says, the Jordan River, we're not talking about a little stream that we can just hop over. Or even a little ford that's maybe knee deep that everybody can just kind of, wade across. It says that at this time of year that the Jordan is swollen over its banks. So it's in flood stage. So again, the idea of getting from one side to the other isn't just a snap the fingers foregone conclusion. So, we've got all this going on at this time. And going through the minds of Joshua and the Israelites. But if you look at a couple of verses there, Jehovah takes the time to reassure Joshua and his people of a couple things. First of all, in verse 7 of chapter 3, he says, "And the Lord said to Joshua, this day will I begin to magnify thee in the sight of all Israel, that they may know that as I was with Moses, so I will be with thee." And then if you skip down to verse 10 and 11, he reassures the people themselves too. He says, "Behold, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth passes over before you into Jordan. Now therefore take you 10 and 11. Behold the ark, 10, that's what I skipped over, sorry. Joshua said, Hereby ye shall know that the living God is among you, and that he will without fail drive out from before you the Canaanites, and the Hittites, and the Hivites, and the Perizzites, and the Girgashites, and the Amorites, and the Jebusites." So he reassures them that he's going to do what he promised them he was going to do. So he does that. And so, as he instructed him, Joshua tells the priests that are carrying the ark, okay, head up to the river. And as the priests step into the river, what happens? the water parts. And they walk out and stand in the middle of the river. And interesting thing, so we'll start in verse 15 of chapter 3. It says, "And as they that bear the ark were coming to the Jordan, and the feet of the priests that bear the ark were dipped in the brim of the water, for the Jordan overflowed all its banks at the time of the harvest. But the waters which came down from above stood and rose up in a heap very far from the city Edom, that is behind Zaratan. And those that came down toward the sea of the plain, even the salt sea, failed. They were all cut off, and the people passed right over against Jericho. And the priests that bear the ark of the covenant of YHVH stood firm on dry ground in the midst of Jordan. Now the Israelites passed over on dry ground until all the people were passed clean over Jordan." Now, if you take a piece of land that's been covered with water for any length of time, and then suddenly you get a pump or something and you pump all the water out, what's that ground going to be like?
Muddy.
It's going to be muddy, and it's going to be slippery, and it's going to be nasty. That isn't what happened here, is it? It says the priests, they stood, they were on dry ground, and all the people passed over on dry ground. So, that's one of the first things that Jehovah did for them, is he made their crossing smooth as could be, and allowed for them to finally enter into the promised land. And where I want to spend our time looking at today is something that happened in the midst of that crossing that Jehovah instructed the Israelites to do. And again, help them to be able to remember, as we talked about. And that's in chapter 3, early on, it says, "And Joshua said to the people, Sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow Jehovah will do wonders among you. And where is it? Sorry, I'm skipping over it here. There we are, sorry, down to verse 12. It says, "Now therefore take you 12 men out of the tribes of Israel, out of every tribe of men." Now it doesn't say why there at that point, other than Joshua just selected 12 men. Well, as we skip over to chapter 4, we find out why. It says, "It came to pass when all the people were clean passed over Jordan, that Jehovah spake unto Joshua, saying, Take you 12 men out of the people, out of every tribe of men." So that's, what he had done. It says, "And command them, saying, Take you hence out of the midst of Jordan, out of the place where the priest's feet stood firm, 12 stones, and you shall carry them over with you, and leave them in the lodging place where you shall lodge this night." Then Joshua called the 12 men whom he had prepared of the children of Israel, out of every tribe a man. And Joshua said unto them, "Pass over before the ark of Jehovah your Elohim into the midst of the Jordan. Take ye every man of you a stone upon his shoulder, according unto the number of the tribes of the children of Israel. That this may be a sign among you, that when your children ask their fathers in time to come, saying, What mean ye these stones? Then ye shall answer them, that the waters of Jordan were cut off from before the ark of the covenant of Jehovah when it passed over Jordan. The waters of Jordan were cut off, and these stones shall be a memorial unto the children of Israel forever." So Joshua had them pick one man from each of their 12 tribes. And as they passed through, he said, "I want you to grab a stone out of the midst of the river and carry it with you over to where we're going to camp tonight." That's, again, the instructions that Jehovah gave Joshua and what he had them do. So, and that's what I want us to spend some time looking at today. To look at what Jehovah did for them to help them remember to remember. And I want to just look at 3 things real quick about this incident and what happened. First of all, I want to look at the materials. What did he have them use? Rocks. Okay? Now, to me, rocks speaks of something that's somewhat permanent, right? I mean, we talked earlier about how usually ground when it's wet is muddy. But he didn't have them get some muddy water out of the riverbed. He had them get rocks. And that certainly speaks to permanence. He says in verse 7, as we read, he wants this to be a memorial forever. So he wants it to be permanent. And then verse 5, what do you think about the size of the rocks? Was this some skipping pebbles that, that they gathered out of the river? The little handheld things they could just carry over? Nope.
Stonehenge.
What's that?
Stonehenge.
Stonehenge, there we go. Yeah, absolutely. But again, he said this, you got to carry this in your shoulders. So, how about you? But, I have to, so I put something on my shoulder, it's pretty heavy. And so these were not just little rocks. Again, speaking to the permanence, he wanted something substantial. And also as I thought about that, I thought of oftentimes in the Psalms, how much the psalmist talks about rocks in reference or relation to his relationship with Jehovah. Just a few verses. Psalm 31:3 says, "For thou art my rock and my fortress." Or Psalm 18:1 and 2 says, "Jehovah is my rock and my fortress, and my deliverer, my Elohim, my strength, in whom I will trust." Psalm 62:2 says, He only is my rock and my salvation. He is my defense, I shall not be greatly moved. And then skipping down to verse 7 of chapter 62, it says, "And Yah is my salvation and my glory, the rock of my strength, and my refuge is Yah." Just again, that idea that he gives us some permanence and strength that we can rely on. And so I don't think it's any accident that he had them use rocks here to do what he wanted them to do. And then secondly, consider the number of stones that he had them get. How many? 12. And that was one from each of the 12 tribes, right? So he's reminding him just in that, hey, this includes everybody. Not just some of them, but everybody. And then even down in verse 9, I found this, again, interesting, that what's Joshua do in the midst of all this? He takes 12 stones and sets up a little memorial right there in the middle of the river where the priests were standing with the ark, didn't he? Doesn't really say, that Jehovah told him to do that, but I just, again, found it interesting that he did that. It's just another reminder. It says that it was there to that day, or in other words, for certainly as long as when the book was written. Anyway, but, again, we talked about having a stone from each of the 12 tribes was just all-inclusive. He wanted to remind them that, hey, this is for all y'all. Even, remember, there's 2.5 tribes that didn't even inherit in the land itself on the side of the Jordan where they went. I was thinking about the fact that, still they built this altar to where even they, on the other side of the Jordan, could still see it and be reminded of what Jehovah had done for them that day. And so, just that reminder that Yah wants all his people to remember and be part of the remembrance process. He wants us to not forget. No one should be excluded or left out. And then finally, I want to look at for a minute, what was the purpose of it? What did he call it? He called it a memorial. And what is a memorial?
Something to make you remember.
It helps us to remember, absolutely. And often it's, when you think about a memorial, it's something usually made out of stone or metal or something that's, going to last for a while. And it's usually put in a place of prominence so that people can see it and be able to remember why it's there. And so, again, that's why you wanted them to do that, to set up this reminder, just so that they wouldn't forget the miraculous way that he had brought them into the promised land. And, They didn't wander into the wilderness. They had to actually cross a big swollen river that he miraculously stopped up so that they could pass over on dry land. And, you know, the other thing, too, that he stresses here is it's not just for these people, is it? And again, speaks to why he wanted it to be something permanent. Is because it's for future generations, too. You know, Yah knows, and he knows us better than we know ourselves, and he knows that we tend to forget over time. And so he wanted them to be able to have something that they could be reminded, hey, this really happened, and he really did this for us. And, you know, and it says, when the children ask, hey, Dad, why is that pile of rocks there? That they could recount what Yehovah had done for them. And so, as we conclude, I just want us to look at a few things and what things we can take with us today that we can learn from this incident and what it meant. And the first one is just like the rocks. Jehovah's promises to us are forever. They're not just going to go away. Numbers 23:19 says, Yah is not a man that he should lie, nor a son of man that he should change his mind. Has he not spoken, and will he not do it? Or has he promised, and will he not fulfill it? And Hebrews 10:23 says, let us hold fast to the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful.
Amen.
So again, we can be reminded and not forget that Jehovah's blessings to us are permanent, they're forever. And then secondly, when we think about the fact that his blessings and promises are to all his people, he doesn't exclude any of us, no matter where we find ourselves or in our life or what our past is or anything like that. He's faithful to each and every one of us and doesn't want us to feel left out. Psalm 100 verse 5 says, for Jehovah is good, his mercy is everlasting, and his truth endureth to all generations. Lamentations 3:22-25 says, it is of Jehovah's mercy that we are not consumed, because his compassions fail not. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. Jehovah is my portion, saith my soul. Therefore I will hope in him. I've talked before in the past about how much I enjoy that song, Great is thy faithfulness. And this is the passage where that song comes from. But just that reminder that Yah is always faithful, and is for all of us, not just some of us. He wants us all to remember. And in James 1:17 says, every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, and cometh down from the Father of lights, with whom is no variableness, neither shadow of turning. So again, that idea that we can all enjoy and be thankful and of Yahweh's blessings in our lives. And then lastly, and to me, this is really the crux of what this passage said to me. If we read the last 5 verses there of chapter 4. It says there, and those 12 stones which they took out of Jordan did Joshua pitch at Gilgal. And he spake unto the children of Israel, saying, when your children shall ask their fathers in time to come, saying, what mean these stones? Then ye shall let your children know, saying, Israel came over this Jordan on dry ground. For Jehovah your Elohim dried up the waters of Jordan from before you until ye were passed over, as Jehovah your God did to the Red Sea, which he dried up from before us until we were gone over. That all the people of the earth might know the hand of Jehovah, that it is mighty, that ye might fear Jehovah your Elohim forever. Jehovah's blessings are meant to be shared. And when I say that, especially with our children or with our families, the thought it was cool. I thought of this as Carrie was sharing earlier about her daughter and how she went to the doctor and then she got feeling better and they went home and her husband shared with the kids how YHVH had healed her. That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. Those are the things that our kids need to hear. You know, as I said earlier, we tend to forget. But we need to be reminded, and we need to teach our children to remember the great things that YHVH did for us. You know, because that's how they learn to trust Him, is as we share those things with them, and as we teach them that, I mean, YHVH is a good God, isn't He? And in hard times, it's not always easy to remember that. Sometimes we forget. And so, you know, like this memorial, they were good. I mean, the Israelites were going to face some hard times, weren't they? And they needed to be reminded that, hey, YHVH did this for us, and he'll do this too. We can trust Him. And, you know, and again, that's, I think, something that's really important that we teach our kids, is life isn't always easy. It's going to be hard. But bottom line is, YHVH is good. And He cares for us. And He wants to give us good things. And here's an instance where it happened, to remind me and to remind you that that's true. That He is faithful and He does care about us. You know, been a little over 3 years ago that my pop passed away. And we had a memorial service for him, I think, in December, after he passed in September. And, you know, we all got an opportunity to speak what we wanted to. And I got up there, and one of the things I talked about was legacy. I was thinking about, and I said, you know, one of the legacies that my pop left was a big family. I'm the oldest of 6, and we all have kids and grandkids. And what I shared was, because Pop used to use the verse in Psalms where he says has lots of kids, his quiver's full. He used to talk about that. But anyway, I got to counting, and if we were all together in one place, there's 127 of us. And I mean, and I said, you know, that's quite a legacy he left. But, you know, as I was thinking about this today, to me, a better legacy to leave our children is to know and to them to know YHVH's goodness and be able to recount it, and just to be able to remember and to be able to share with their kids things that YHVH does. And again, that's not something that comes natural. We need to be reminded of the things that YHVH does in our life, and the good things, so that we can share them, and so that that legacy can be passed on from one generation to the next. Because His Word says, as we've looked at a couple times today, He talks about forever. And He wanted this memorial to be forever. Because again, He didn't want them to ever forget. And we should never forget, and we should never be afraid to share it with our kids. Because they need to know and they need to understand. You know, and how we do that, it could take any number of forms. I thought about that. My kids, one of the things that they got me this last year for Father's Day was a book. It says, Dad, I want to hear your story. It's basically a journaling story to talk about different things that have happened in your life. And you know, I thought about that, how cool that idea and that concept is, because when it's our time to pass on from this earth, there's a lot of things that probably are going to go to the grave with us if we don't take some steps to not let that happen. And I think that's you know, part of the point here is our trust in YHVH shouldn't die with us. It should live on in our children. And the only way, one of the ways that happens is as we share cool stuff with them about what YHVH does for us, so that legacy and that thing can live on. So, as we conclude, just a question. Where's your pile of rocks? Shabbat shalom.
Thank you.